I'm Liza Lawrence with episode 43, Come What May and Love It. Welcome to Wonders and Miracles podcast, where we celebrate miraculous moments in everyday lives. I'm your host, Liza Lawrence, a wife, mother, teacher, and miracle lover. If you're new to this podcast, this is what we do here. Each week on Miracle Monday, we celebrate awe-inspiring true stories from regular people like you and me. People who have experienced something surprising and wonderful that could be considered the work of a divine source. My desire is to help us recognize God's hand and His love in our lives, because the more miracles we notice, the more miracles happen. Thanks for listening to the show. Now let's celebrate wonders and miracles together. Joseph B. Wirthlin said, "The way we react to adversity can be a major factor in how happy and successful we can be in life." So in this episode today, Amy takes us on a miraculous journey full of many small miracles leading us to the grand miracle that occurred with her husband's brain aneurysm. She shares many truths that she has learned along this journey, including to come what may and love it. Thanks for joining me in the movement that miracles still happen. I'd like to give a shout out to the review of the week and the fan of the week. This is from Rex Babs. More gratitude give me. I listen to Wonders and Miracles in my office while I'm doing paperwork. Liza's podcast fills me with overwhelming gratitude for God's kindness and love towards His children. After I listen, I find myself saying silent prayers to Him, thanking Him for all He's done for me in my life. I feel a sense of peace and security knowing God is in control, even in the little details of our lives. Thank you, Liza, for providing your listeners with a way to fill their days with more light and spiritual upliftment. Thanks for that review. I'm so grateful that you are finding upliftment with this and seeing the miracles in your life. I think that's such a powerful lesson when we notice other people's miracles. We notice our own, and we're filled with gratitude. I know that's how it affects me as well. So I'm so grateful that is how you're seeing this too. If you're enjoying this podcast, I would love it if you could jump onto iTunes and write a review. Let me know what you think of this podcast. All right, we're going to jump right into Amy's story. It's emotional. I was up and down the whole time during her story, and I think you're really going to love this one. I am here with Amy today from Georgia, and she is going to share a story about her husband's aneurysm that happened 10 years ago. So I'm really excited to hear the details of this story. And Amy, thanks so much for being willing to share it. So tell us what happened.
First, thank you for allowing me to have this opportunity to share. It's been a miracle, even just reviewing the miracle. As you mentioned, it was 10 years ago for my husband's aneurysm. But in order to really give due diligence to have you understand why that miracle is so big and so important to our family, I think it would be helpful to fill in a little background information. So back in 2008, I had a very rare condition where my dura around my spinal column spontaneously erupted. It just tore without any reason or rhyme. I ended up in the hospital and needing to have surgery. So I had this very complicated surgery on the back of my neck, then healed and thought all was well, to find out just a couple of weeks after that it had not actually been healed completely. There was actually a tear on the other side of the spinal column that needed to also have been patched at that time when they were doing the original surgery. So we went back to go to my surgeon to get some help and found out that due to some complications in his life, he was no longer available. So we were left stranded, per se, with no neurosurgeon to be able to help with this complicated situation. Luckily, my husband, Dave, who this story is really going to highlight, had actually had a ruptured disc, and that had happened back in 2007. So he had known a neurosurgeon that did that surgery for him, and it went beautifully. So he said, let's call Dr. Jim Morrison. We got an appointment with him. My situation was very complicated. So this became a very intense situation that needed to be escalated to the entire Atlanta area. And doctors were being asked from all over to see if they had any opinions as to how Dr. Morrison could actually correct the situation. He did find and paired up with a pain doctor eventually who decided to go in and do a procedure called a blood patch. It sounds easy and it's not. It was very life-threatening, but it worked out. And in the meantime, I became very close friends with this Dr. Morrison. And he would recognize my name in the future, which became a very big part of Dave's miracle. So time goes forward when we found out that my husband had a serious condition as well. Nope, we haven't even gotten to the brain aneurysm yet. He found out that he had a blood clot in his leg. And upon going to the ER, they did either ultrasound or x-ray that's needed to be done. And all I know is that at one point I was just sitting casually in the ER. The next thing I know, we are being rushed to our private room and doctors are filling the room. Well, apparently, he didn't just have a blood clot in his leg. He had multiple, too many to count, lung embolisms in his lung, which are blood that have already been thrown and are now dangerously lurking in your lungs. And at any moment, if they were to move into the heart, they could kill you. That's not something that you can operate on. So we just needed to work with different medications. And he's sent home with a blood thinner called Coumadin. It's a very known drug for being able to help those that have this condition of blood clotting. So he's on this medication, and he's going to be on this medication for the first 3 months and then go back in. And then they said they would assess what they would do from there. So to understand just a little bit about me, I am a supporter of Western medicine, and I have an appreciation of doctors' knowledge and their wisdom, but I also have a caution when it comes to using medications for long periods of time. I understand and can see the value for in acute situations. Definitely in an acute situation, you would want to have the proper medications that your body needs. But whenever a doctor says that you're going to be on a medication for 3 months, and then we'll look to see if we're going to have you get off of it or stay on it for life, that raises a red flag for me. So I was already not very comfortable with this idea that my husband would be on a medication for the rest of his life, and it started to investigate other alternatives. That quest sent me to an area of learning about natural solutions. And after the doctor's visit at his 3-month checkup, they did say we would feel best if you stayed on the Coumadin for the rest of your life. We don't know exactly why you got those blood clots, but there were so many of them. And just with the factors around this, we would like you to stay on that medication. By that time, I had done some studying about what some other alternatives could be, and I presented those to my husband. We have a wonderful relationship, and we very much value each other's opinions. But I also understand that when it comes to a doctor telling you that your life would be in danger if you do not follow his advice, I can completely understand why my husband was not ready to be able to embrace my knowledge about alternatives that I felt would be safer for him. So I can distinctly remember a day having a conversation with him about whether he was going to take his medication. He actually needed to go get it refilled. I begged him not to refill that prescription, but he said, I just don't think I have the confidence to not do what the doctor's asking me to do at this point. I remember saying to him, then just don't tell me that you did it. I would just really appreciate it if we don't talk about this again. And so we really made an agreement that he was going to go ahead and do that, and that I just wouldn't talk about it, and he wouldn't talk about it with me, and then we'd just be okay with it. Well, why does that matter? Because I know this will be out of order, but I'm just going to go ahead and jump to this. After my husband has the aneurysm, we're in the second emergency room where the neurosurgeon is saying, I need to go in. It's been confirmed that he has had an aneurysm, which is a bleed on the brain. And I need to do a angiogram, which is where we'll go in and assess what kind of aneurysm was it. And then I'll know what the next best step will be. And then he stopped and said to me, but ma'am, I need to know, is your husband on a blood thinner? And everything inside of me just stopped and froze as I said, I don't know. He has a blood thinner prescribed to him. He had been taking it for the entire summer, but I don't know if he currently is. And he looked at me very soberly and with much compassion. And he said, I need to tell you something. If your husband is on a blood thinner, there is no way that I can save his life. There will nothing that we can do for him. And then he left me.
Wow.
So That was a very intense moment for me where I prayed that my husband had, for some miraculous reason, decided to heed my caution that I had been given earlier, that this particular medication and for this particular person was not going to be in our best favor. I was left with quandary and didn't know the answer to that until that surgeon came out of that operating room. And you all know the answer, because he is still alive, and this is a miracle story, and it luckily happens to be a miracle where my husband is still with us. Not that that can't also be the case when they are taken, that it is a miracle. So that's just that little part. Go back in time now with me, and it is just after Christmas, December 2008, and me and my 6 children and my husband have celebrated and had a wonderful time together. And then 2 days later, celebrated my oldest daughter's 18th birthday. Following the celebration of my daughter's birthday, we were going to then go to Kansas City, Missouri to visit my little sister and her 6 children. So we had decided to travel up there and be there for New Year's Day. So if you can imagine a household of 8 and Christmas having just happened and then a child's 18th birthday, the house was pretty much destroyed. On top of that, we had decided to finish off our basement. So my husband, having the little bit of time off that he was going to have between the holidays, decided to tackle replastering and repainting our basement. The next thing I know, my kids said, "We want to get to the Reese's a day early. Let's not get there right on New Year's Eve. Let's get there the day before. Then we'll really be able to celebrate with them." And I looked around the house and I thought, there is no way. I said, I'm going to go ask Dad. So we went down, asked Dave. So I went back up and announced to the kids, guess what? We are willing to leave a day early if you will get everything picked up from Christmas and help me take the Christmas tree down. So that was our deal. We got everything put away, and true to what we had said, we were going to then jump in the car and start driving on our trip to Kansas City. Now, I know I told you that I was going to keep going, but I just realized we got to really keep going. Now, not only am I going to go past the aneurysm, I'm going to go to the day I got back to Atlanta. I have been gone now for about 4 weeks from our home, but let me just tell you what happened on that day, because remember how I was standing in the waiting room with an absolute feeling of dread as the unanswered question, is my husband on Coumadin, rang through my head over and over again. I tried to recall, had I seen Dave take any medications? Had I seen him go and pick up anything? And I just had blocked that so out of my mind that I could not think of any clues to be able to answer that question for myself. And I go home for the first time in weeks, and the light on my answering machine is blinking. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, my answering machine's full. I can't imagine how many messages I have to respond to. And I go to hit the button that allows all the recordings to start playing back. I can still remember the emotion of that first message that said, "Good afternoon, this is CVS Pharmacy, and we want to let you know that Dave Gregerson's prescription for his Coumadin is in, and you may pick it up at any time today. Thank you." Had my children not had the idea of leaving a day early, my husband would not be on this earth with us today, for he had decided to get his prescription filled, but had forgotten that he hadn't picked up the actual prescription. So that point is a very important part of how God works with us, how he uses other people sometimes to be the instrument to work in our lives, to get us where we need to be, and to be able to have situations arise that you don't understand at the time. And it seemed like nothing more than my children being excited to go see their cousins. But I truly wonder what in the world made them think that we needed to go a day early when they would have to do so much work in order for that to have happened. And now I know that it was because that was their part of the miracle that our Heavenly Father was orchestrating piece by piece by piece to keep their dad and my husband on this earth for a little longer. Now we're back in Kansas City, and we get there for New Year's Eve, and we have a great time celebrating, and we go through New Year's Day, and everything is great. And on the early wee morning of Saturday, January 3rd, before anyone else woke up, and in fact, it was probably around 5:30 to 6 a.m., I had the feeling to actually start talking to my husband. And so we whisperingly started a conversation so that we wouldn't disturb the sleeping children that were asleep in our room. Then, without any warning or notice, my husband just stopped talking. And the next thing I know, he made this horrendous noise. And I actually thought he was playing a game with me, being like he had fallen asleep on me while we were talking, because he knows that really bugs me. And so I was like, Dave, that's not fair. Like, don't do that. And you're going to wake the kids up. And that was all that I cared about, is you're going to wake the kids up. But then I realized he wasn't moving. And as I shook him, he still wasn't moving, and he wasn't laughing, and he wasn't responding. And the dread of that dark room, I realized he wasn't breathing. My entire body went numb. My brain was numb. I couldn't think of anything that I was supposed to do. And I didn't even want to make any noises because I didn't want to wake up my kids. That's the only thing I could remember, was don't wake up children when they're sleeping. And the next thing I knew, my little 3-year-old sat straight up in bed and said, Mama, are you okay? And I don't even know to this day why he did that, except he must have listened to the angels. And I then realized that he was awake and it was okay for them to be awake. And I started to scream, and I screamed over and over, Eve, help me. Dave's not breathing. And she was down a whole nother flight of stairs in her bedroom asleep. As she heard that, the kids heard that. My other sister, who was there for the New Year, heard it. They then came running in, and it was my sister that I attribute to saving Dave's life, because she said, he's had a heart attack. Let's do CPR. So she immediately started into doing the pumping, and I actually started the breathing. So she pumped and I breathed, and we together performed CPR on Dave. In the meantime, people started to call 911, and then we waited for the paramedics to come. So I'm in night attire, and I heard a voice say to me, Amy, you're going to be going to the hospital, and you don't want to go like that. Turn around and put on your clothes. They're right by your bed. And sure enough, very unlike me, I had left my clothing all complete, everything I needed, right next to the bed. I literally turned, slipped those clothes on, went right back to doing CPR with my husband. And so when they showed up, I had clothes on. I was ready to go. So there were so many times of me trying to just go through the motions of what do I do next, where I didn't have the capacity to know what to do next, but the angels around us do. And I do know that we are surrounded by angels. And I do know that they can speak to us if it is needful for us to hear something. We continued to do the CPR as the hospital ambulance showed up. It was actually not enough. He had actually already passed, but they did say that because of us doing that, it was able to keep oxygen in his body, which allowed that to later be the reason that he had no brain damage due to this aneurysm. As I came down the stairs and they were loading him onto the stretcher, I looked into the front room and I saw that our 14 children, my 6 children, her 6 children, and my other 2 nieces of my sisters were there in a circle. And another voice said to me, they need you to go and say a prayer with them before you leave. So I literally told the paramedics, we cannot leave yet. And I walked into the room and knelt down and held their hands. And we all knelt in that circle with faith that God is in charge. And I was able to let go and then go with Dave into whatever the future held for our family. And I left in the ambulance and we went to the first hospital, and that's where I mentioned before. They found out and confirmed that, yes, he had had an aneurysm. That little hospital was certainly not ready to be able to handle that difficult of situation. So we were then put into our second ambulance and then whisked off to the next hospital, which was the Kansas City, Missouri hospital in Kansas City. That's when we then show up in that room. Remember, as I was saying, that they took him away to do an angiogram and they needed to find out if he was on any blood thinners. Hence that whole moment of panic as I had to answer him, I don't know. Now we're waiting in that emergency room. And one part that increases the reality that there was a very high chance that my husband would not be recovering from this critical situation was that his father also experienced a brain aneurysm at almost the exact same age, and he passed away. So at the age of 6, my husband lost his father. So as we all waited in the room, we said a prayer, and I just had to rely on my faith that God is in charge of time and he is in charge of life. And I decided at that moment that I was putting Dave's life in God's hands. And in those moments, I was assured that I did have God's helping hand with me, and that if I would listen, he would guide me. So a few minutes later, the neurosurgeon came out of the room and he said to me, I'm sorry to tell you that yes, your husband has experienced a brain aneurysm, and it's a very rare brain aneurysm. It's called a fusiform aneurysm. It is not one that is a simple thing to fix. That's why I didn't go immediately into surgery, even just from the angiogram. I need to get your permission because there could be even more additional complications to performing the surgery. And yet I feel it is vital to perform this surgery if we're going to save your husband's life. And as he was speaking, I heard a voice that said very calmly and very confidently, you are not to have the surgery performed on Dave. And so I looked up at the neurosurgeon and I said, I'm not sure I feel comfortable okaying you taking him into surgery right now. I really feel like I need to have a second opinion. And I don't mean to be disrespectful to doctors, and I know he did not mean to be disrespectful to me. I think he was just realizing the brevity of this situation. And he said, Miss Gregerson, your doctor would need to be a neurosurgeon. Do you know a neurosurgeon? I laughed and I said, actually, doctor, the only doctor I know is a neurosurgeon. And that was Dr. Jim Morrison. That was the only doctor I could actually have said with any confidence that I knew enough to want to call in that situation and ask an opinion of. So he said, okay, if you know a neurosurgeon and you want to give him a call, then yes, by all means, go do that. But this is of time essence, and we really need to decide what we're doing. And so I made that call to that doctor. And as I mentioned, because of my rare situation, he not only recognized my name, he took my call personally. He stopped seeing his patients. He went into the room and called me personally and said, what is up, Amy? And I said, Dave has had an aneurysm and they want to do surgery on him. And it's a fusiform aneurysm. And that's all I know. But I don't feel good about doing the surgery. What should I do? And he said, let me get back to you. I know how traumatic this is for you right now and that you yourself are in shock because my own father just experienced an aneurysm. And so I had to go through the same process of who would I get to operate on my father. And I knew that I was not qualified to do that kind of operation because these things are very serious and you have to have very special training to be able to actually accurately get in and work on someone's brain in this way. So I want you to know that I chose Dr. Barrow from Emory University here in Atlanta to fly Dad to have that surgery done. I will call him and I will let you know his opinion, Amy. Don't do anything yet. And so I was able to actually have the most peaceful, like this does not all rest on my shoulders. I know I told him I don't want to do this surgery yet, but now I at least have some doctors that are in this field and know what they're talking about. And he ended up calling me back and he said, we cannot actually make those judgments without having the x-rays in front of us. But if he's right, that it's a fusiform aneurysm, Dr. Barrow wants you to know that that's an extremely delicate situation and that he would actually back up your decision to not have that surgery done right now. But there are many other risks that are involved with anyone who has had an aneurysm and that you are not out of the woods yet. And so with that, I went back and just said to this doctor, I am not going to do the surgery. I know that part of it was just that he truly believed that that's what needed to be done to save my husband's life. So he was not exactly pleased with my decision. And in fact, he refused to come and see Dave even the days following that because he felt like I was putting Dave's life at risk against his best judgment. And so as I continued to realize that this was not going to be the place for me to be and that I needed to find a way to get my husband to Georgia, that became the next part of our story that is nothing short of a miracle. So I don't have the doctor on my side here in Kansas City. In fact, he won't even come in to see me. And he's staying adamant that he does not agree with the protocol of trying to get him to Georgia, and that he needs to perform this surgery, and not just needs to, he needs to perform it quickly. About 9 days later, they did an additional angiogram on him. They're still in Kansas City, and they found out that it was indeed a rare fusiform aneurysm, and such that the clamp they would have needed to have repaired it had they done that original surgery was not available in their hospital. So they would have opened up his brain and done this extremely complicated procedure to just find out that they would have had to have reclosed him back up, and it wouldn't have been fixed. When we found out that they couldn't even do the surgery there in Kansas City, he did say, but I've ordered the part, and now I would be able to do the surgery today. And that was the only other time that he came into my room, was to tell me that he could do another surgery now. And I, once again, thought, okay, maybe I'm supposed to be doing this now. Like, okay, it was just because he didn't have the parts. And I heard the voice again, you're not to perform the surgery there in Kansas City. And so once again, I had to boldly tell this doctor that even though I knew that he now had the proper equipment, I was going to decline his gracious offer to operate on my husband, and that I felt it imperative that we work to get him back to Atlanta. This is a very complicated situation. To be able to get a patient that is under a doctor's care from one state to another requires the signatures and approval of both, not just the doctor that'll let you leave, but believe it or not, you can't fly someone to another state for an emergency medical procedure with no doctor. And so the doctor that we had talked about, that Dr. Barrow, he had not seen, nor had he been able to actually even arrange on his schedule to be able to see Dave, as he was in the middle of doing and performing surgeries that had been booked for months and weeks and days ahead. So Dr. Morrison said, I will be the receiving doctor. And because he was a neurosurgeon, he was allowed, from insurance point of view, to be the doctor that I could transfer him back to Atlanta, even though we both knew, Dr. Morrison included, he would not be doing any procedures on Dave. So I was able to go and tell this other doctor that we had a receiving doctor, but he still, and I really do believe it was because of the danger that was involved in this whole idea of transporting someone with such a critical condition. He just could not feel good about doing it. And he said, I cannot put my name on that paper. And so I started a fast as a family that I would be able to find a way to get my husband on an airplane and able to get to Georgia. And I was sitting in the waiting room of the hospital one day when I saw the head of the hospital go walk by my window. And I was having a very difficult time this day, really feeling like, Heavenly Father, I listened to you. I listened, and now it's a dead end. I can't do anything else. And the doctor is not going to allow this to happen. And then that head of the department, he came walking by me, and I looked up and he smiled at me. And there was something that moment that I knew a miracle had happened. And so I left the room and I went and I actually met with the head of the entire department, and they said, we know that you have been requesting that your husband move from here to Atlanta, but that the doctor that he's under the charge of has not felt comfortable. Well, we have found a way for him to be able to go, but to also honor the feelings of this doctor. If he would just release him from his care, then we could have the hospital be the acting doctor. And that made that doctor not feel so responsible that his name was the one associated with if my husband were to die. Instead, it was just the practice's name that would be on that discharge sheet. And so at that moment, I knew we were going home. And I called to let everyone know that the miracle had happened, that we had gotten permission, and that we would be able to life flight my husband from Kansas City to Atlanta. Now, mind you, the danger was in the air. So the physician had felt certain that because of Dave's traumas, that the altitude change and all the blood pressure changes that happen to an individual when they're flying was going to actually cause an additional pressure on the brain, which would then cause that second aneurysm that's already at risk. So I can remember being in the airplane, and to be able to just quiet my nerves, I decided to write in my journal. And so I journaled on that whole flight, this story as it had unfolded so far to me. And most importantly, I journaled my testimony, my belief that God is in charge of life, and that as I had put Dave's life in his hands, that I was willing to accept whatever that outcome was once again. And that I needed to have that in writing, because sometimes we can know something, but then when it happens, it's just so hard to remember what we knew.
I love that.
So I opened up the doors of this airplane. The first thing that my eyes saw in Atlanta was a huge banner that my family made. And it said, "Welcome home, Dave. You made it." And the emotions of having to hold on to the fact that your husband could die any second on that entire plane ride. There's never been a more embracing moment in my life as realizing I was home and Dave was alive. So they took him in the ambulance from there to Northside Hospital, where we were met by Dr. Morrison. We then were just kind of stationed there for a little while. And then the doctor was contacted, and they had an opening in the schedule. He called actually at about 9 o'clock at night and said, "I've had an opening happen for tomorrow morning. Can you get him here?" And we literally said, absolutely. And within 30 minutes, we loaded up our things, got onto another ambulance, and headed from Northside Hospital over to Emory Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. And were put on the books for the next morning to be able to see Dr. Barrow. So they did a 4D angiogram so that they could see it from every aspect. This best neurosurgeon that we could possibly find in the entire country, he said, "I'm not going to be able to wrap it the way that an aneurysm would need to be wrapped. If you have a hole in a tire and some air has come out, in this case it was blood, we are not meant to have blood in our brain. And that's why aneurysms kill 90% of the people within seconds of the aneurysm. So you want to wrap it up. You want to glue it. You want to reinforce that blood vessel in any way that's possible so that there's no possibility that any future just flow of blood through that area would pop through that area again." Well, the problem was, because of the fusiform shape of the aneurysm, they were not able to get to it because it would have had to cut through a major artery. And so they had already let me know that they were just going to go in and see if there was any way to like put a little glue or do something that could at least try to get something to that area, but there would be no way to be able to wrap the area. Now remember, that was a 4G. That means 4-dimensional angiogram that would allow them to see it the very best possible way that they could see this blood vessel and the area in Dave's brain. So Dave did have the surgery. It went beautifully. And I can remember the just rush of relief. When the doctor came up, he said, matter of factly, "Well, we were able to be a success and we got it wrapped and completely taken care of. I don't think we'll ever have a problem again in that area." And I looked at him and I said, "You mean you just tried to patch it? You weren't able to wrap it?" He said, "No, we were able to completely wrap it." And I said, "How could that be?" And he looked at me and then he just said, "Things were different when we actually got in than they were on the angiogram. Something had changed."
Wow.
Well, I know that what had changed is that my husband was given a special blessing by members of our church. And in that blessing, it was declared that he would have a full and complete recovery. So when that doctor came into that room after that surgery and pronounced that something had changed in the very form of my husband's brain, I knew what had changed. A miracle changed his brain and healed him and allowed the doctor to do what he could then be skilled and able to do. So that is the miracle of my husband's brain aneurysm. It is one that as I thought about sharing this story, and more was revealed to me, the many miracles that were a part of this grand miracle. And I know two things. There is a life after death, and there is a God who loves us. One other part of the miracle that has to do with that blessing, where we were told to have a complete recovery. they had told me about these spasms. That was one of my jobs, was that I was to constantly be watching for him to actually look like he may be in distress. And then they would know that he may be having one of these spasms. And they would need to go in and do another surgery immediately if that happened. And so as I was there, one late evening, my sister Marcy was with me. I've now been promised in a blessing that he would have a full and complete recovery. So even though we were looking for these spasms, I just didn't think that he would have them because I already knew that he was going to be fine. And so we had a busy night of actually visiting with Dave. We were there at the end of the bed and we were talking to Dave, and all of a sudden he started to slur his speech. And I remember hitting the call button and the nurses running in and asking us to leave the room immediately. And I left that room watching my husband deteriorate before my eyes. And I went into the little chapel that was there at the hospital with my sister at 1:00 in the morning. I just asked God, I don't understand how you would promise me a full recovery and then take my husband from me. And then I remember that my sister just put her arm around me and said, Amy, it's okay to be scared. And it's okay for you to doubt, but you know that God keeps his promises, and he has kept every promise he's made to you so far. He will come through on this one too. And her faith let me remember my faith. And I knew then something will happen and he will be healed. That something was an additional brain surgery. And yes, it took time, but my husband did have a full and complete recovery.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm so happy for you that you saw God's hand throughout the whole thing and that he was able to stay and it wasn't his time yet.
That was a beautiful part of the lessons I learned too, is that no suffering is in vain. That is literally a truth that I know. I'm just so grateful that Heavenly Father would love us enough to allow us to go through our own difficulties so that we can see truths in other people's difficulties.
Yeah.
And there was a talk by one of the elders of our church that was called Come What May and Love It. That was a pivotal part of my journey. In fact, when I was in the hospital room waiting for Dave when he was having his surgery and the computer had been opened, I was just there praying and the computer turned on and that talk, Come What May and Love It, started to play all on its own.
Wow.
And Elder Worthland's voice and face were right in front of me, telling me that no matter what experiences we have on this earth, that we will learn to come what may and love it.
I love that.
It was wonderful, though. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity, and have a great day.
Thank you. All right, that's our episode for today. Truly, it was an emotional roller coaster. Up and down with you, Amy. I loved it. Thank you so much for sharing your testimony and the experiences that you had. So inspiring. It's funny, I was being interviewed for a newspaper, and the interviewer asked me, what's your favorite miracle story that you've ever recorded? I couldn't think of one, and I said, it's the one I'm working on that week because I just fall in love with all of your stories, and I relive them as I'm editing. I cry with you. I smile. I feel gratitude. I feel all the emotions all over again, and I am so grateful that I get to experience this with you. So thank you for sharing your stories. If you have a miracle story that you'd be willing to share, jump onto my website at wondersandmiracles.com and submit your story. Joseph B. Worthland said, "The way we react to adversity can be a major factor in how happy and successful we can be in life." I hope you can think of a time when you have seen God orchestrating those miracles all around you as well. And I hope we all can learn to come what may and love it. And we might not love it in the moment, and that's okay. But hopefully, eventually, we will. And remember to notice and celebrate the miracles everywhere, because the more miracles we notice, the more miracles happen.